and double bills, and we're all so fragmented around here. But with this guy, I can talk about anything. And when we bring Chris Pike on here, as I say in the title ad on Facebook Live and YouTube, we're going to talk about whatever we feel like talking about. How's that sound, Chris Pike?
That sounds good.
He is Blog and Tackle Ad on Twitter, and, of course, the communications director for the Football Writers Association, as well as the Bahamas Bowl. But it is summer. You are a bird watcher from way back and a Mount St. Joe grad. And look, you're my only buddy that's ever really been in a 30 for 30. You were in your own Michael Jordan Birmingham Barons thing, and people can Google that and get a little background on you, Chris. But the 30 for 30 on Dunbar came out last week, and I thought, you know what? Pica is going to have a Dunbar story for me. And I know. Tell everybody about your life. You graduated St. Joe 81, 82, 83, really?
Yeah.
So we're closer in age than I think, even though I look younger than you.
Okay. I'll give you that.
I graduated 85, but I thought you were in Loyola. So I met you in January of 84, and you were at Loyola College. But you were a freshman?
Yes.
Really? I always saw you as being far older than me for some reason, and I did not know you were 83. When was Schwartz? Was he 81?
He was 84 grad at St. Joe.
You know, time and distance makes all of you a lot older.
Who writes for Bleacher Report? They were in the same class in 84.
Yeah, we talked about that at the Super Bowl with him, right?
Yeah.
All right, so 84. I was 85. In that era, I mean, the Calvert Hall Dunbar thing, certainly in 82, and Dwayne Farrell and all that. But the legend of Dunbar at that point, I was in high school when all of that was happening. It was all very familiar to me. I was working down at the News American with you. Little known story, Chris Pike is my first ever media friend. He was literally the guy that let me in the door at the News American in January of 1984. So to go back and to have Bobby Sablehouse put this thing together, and to see Bob Wade and Muggsy and Wingate and Williams, who I haven't heard from ever. I've never had those guys on my radio show ever. I've never been in a room with them that I'm aware of, other than I probably saw Reggie Williams play basketball in the NBA. And to see these guys paint this story all these years later, the saddest part for me is I don't really have a Dunbar story other than I was going to go to the Fuel Fund game. I saw the highlights from the Baltimore then Civic Center. Remember, Chris, when it was painted purple and orange and black in that deep, crazy purple wall they had there for the stage? That was the era of the Baltimore Blast as well, but that was the era of Muggsy Bogues doing these no-look passes and doing this crazy stuff, and I'm embarrassed to say that I never really saw them play, but I can say that I did wait up late for Chris Thomas or Vince Bagley to show the highlights.
They were an incredible team in that era in Baltimore high school, and they're guys that have a lot better grasp that history than I do. I mean, I think most folks up there know that the private schools, or the Catholic schools in Baltimore, the Baltimore Catholic League, of which Mount St. Joe is a member, they and the city schools do not play each other in the regular season and have not since a riot at Dunbar in 1971 when St. Joe beat them there for the MSA championship. And the Baltimore Catholic League was formed after that incident, basically. And so with very few exceptions, the Catholic schools and the city schools have not played each other in basketball. And during my time at St. Joe, we scrimmaged Dunbar in a closed door scrimmage. No score kept, that kind of thing. More of a chance to play, and those kinds of things went on. But the teams never hit. Those teams never hit the floor together, and that was a good heyday of Catholic League basketball. So, I mean, if you were a fan of high school basketball in Baltimore in the early and mid-'80s, the amount of talent that came out of Calvert Hall, Gibbons, Dunbar, City, Walbrook. I mean,
Southwestern. I remember Rudy Archer dribbling in that era. I remember, all the players. Dwayne Chase was here. The Dunbar kids. After that, the Doziers, who have made their own mark with offspring playing sports now at the NCAA Division I level. I remember it, and we were from Dundalk, and we played Kenwood and Patapsco, and every once in a while Woodlawn and Randallstown would, make the drive across the other side of the Beltway and kick our tails. And, I remember Antoine Harris was my class who was going to go to Maryland at one point, was a running back, was an incredible athlete. But, a lot of the kids found trouble in that era too, right? I mean, we talked about Skip Wise a little bit in the 30 for 30 and what that represented at that time. And, it was nothing mixed, right? I mean, in Dundalk, we never played Dunbar, so I never got to see them play. They did play Towson Center. They played at the arena once or twice, but it was a little bit of a it was a small gym. The kids filled it up. I went to one Dunbar game, Chris. This is my Dunbar story, and if Pete Pompey were here, he would tell you about this. I covered a Dunbar Lake Clifton battle for number one, like a legitimate incredible game where Sam Cassell was the guard for that Dunbar team. I want to say it was 87 or 88. I was working at the news at the Evening Sun, at the newspaper, not the News Post, as your parents and my parents would say. Yep. But I walked into the Dunbar gym one time. I'm not just being straight. There were 5 Caucasians in the gym. Me and Keith Mills were among them. The place was packed an hour before the game. The band was playing. The pom-poms were out. Cassell was back-talking Pete Pompey. If I get Sam on here, I'm going to give him a hard time about that. But I saw Sam Cassell play there against a really, really good Lake Clifton team. Ronnie Lucas was on that team who went to Kansas State, I believe. And I saw a very, very memorable game as I remember it between Lake Clifton and Dunbar. They was number 1 versus number 2, that sort of thing. And they played twice, home and away. But it was in the afterglow. Right? I mean, so I never saw Muggsy and Russ and those guys play, but I did get to see one time, one day, one game. I did have to have that experience 30 years ago, and to see this thing come to life in the 30 for 30, it's really an incredible story, 30 years later about these kids and what happened to them and the incredible sadness around Reggie Lewis. But for a kid like you on the west side and growing up in West Baltimore on, tough tracks and going to Mount St. Joe and going to Loyola, and for me, going to Dundalk and Dundalk Community College and UB and our paths intersecting, this Dunbar story, almost 40 years later, Chris, I'll put it right up there with any other story from Baltimore, whether it's Ripken's streak or whether it's Super Bowl or whether it's the Irsay moving of the Mayflowers. This is a top 5 all-time Baltimore sports story as I see it.
Well, and the thing about that is the fact that the players at Dunbar, the players of that era, the students of that era, were coming out of, were growing up after the riots in '68, and everything that went on with that.
Well, you mentioned the '71 riot. I mean, I'm not even really familiar with that story. Can you expound on that anywhere, or is there something written about that you would recommend?
It was the MSA championship game, and St. Joe beat Dunbar at Dunbar for the MSA championship in '71. There was a riot that started late in that game. The St. Joe players and their coach, Gene Nieberlein, locked themselves. Basically, they were locked into the visiting locker room, and police were called in and got them out of the gym because they went into Dunbar and beat them. And after that season, the late Jerry Savage, who was at Loyola High School, Ray Mullis at Gibbons, and other Catholic school leaders decided that they weren't going to be part of the MSA as far as playing the city schools anymore. So that led to the formation of the Baltimore Catholic League. And that kind of started that. I mean, unfortunately, that was a product of the times.
Well, you know what? That wasn't something that was in the movie that would have made the movie even more rich with history and color, because the piece was incredible, but I never really knew. And look, I covered high school sports. I never really knew why we didn't play them and they didn't play us, and the city didn't play the county, and the Catholic. I mean, look, Dundalk didn't play Calvert Hall either, or Mount St. Joe, or McDonough, or whatever. Right. And look, I covered all of that, so I was much like you, growing up in a newspaper and seeing those charts and those tables, and having Kathy Frazier, straighten me up, make me fly right, and show me how to do things. And Sam Davis back at the Sun when I was there back in the 1980s as well. It was a rich thing of covering these teams, but the history wasn't always sort of written in black and white in the newspaper, and some of it becomes urban legend, and some of it you believe and you don't believe, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it was just a different time, and a lot of it's the scheduling, set up because of how the leagues are set up, how the MSA was set up, how the Maryland Public Schools Association, MPSAA, handles how they have the county teams play, and those in that organization. So that's what made the '81 game between Dunbar and Calvert Hall at the Towson Center so amazing. Was that just didn't happen very often, and these two teams played each other, and Calvert Hall beat Dunbar in a triple overtime game that is regarded as maybe the best high school basketball game ever played in the city of Baltimore.
Which, by the way, they gave short shrift to that in the 30 for 32. So, and that was really, I think that spurred them on, right? That was
trying to play the next year when both teams were undefeated.
Right.
And, Mark Amatucci, who's the head coach at Calvert Hall, who was my coach at Loyola College, basically said he thought that game took a little bit out of them the year before, and they were trying to play the following year, but it was going to be a situation where could they play in season or could they play after the Alhambra tournament? And the Alhambra tournament is the National Catholic Tournament, which is the top 8 teams in Catholic schools in the country go to Frostburg State and play there out in Cumberland, and that's a big time tournament. You win the Baltimore Catholic League, you get a berth in that tournament. And Calvert Hall went perfect that year and won the mythical high school national championship in the same year that Dunbar went undefeated. So, like I said, it's just great history, great players, and great memories.
You know what? I am typing right now, just on the Facebook live thread that we have, that Chris Pica is an encyclopedia of Baltimore sports history, which is why I'm glad I'm talking to you about this. All right, onward and upward, off the Dunbar topic and your 30 for 30 Birmingham Barons fame, which you can all Google, and follow Chris Pica at Blog and Tackle. The Orioles, we get together every week or two. Sometimes I skip a week or 3 with you, and, nothing changes here other than the Duquette thing. He smells like a savant when this kid Beckham, hits 500 ball the first 2 weeks. Unprecedented in the history of Major League Baseball, let alone a long, long litany of Oriole trades that didn't work out after in July, where guys come in and hit 158, not 518. But, he is a bit of a savant on some of these things, and they are very much, strangely, still alive in this thing because all of these teams stink, Chris.
The American League, as we've talked about several times, is basically a lot of mediocre baseball right now. There's a lot of teams that can't really seem to run away with the second wild card spot. I think you get the sense that the first wild card is going to be, going to reside in the American League East with the Yankees at this point. But you look at the rest of the teams in that mix. I mean, the Angels, Minnesota, Kansas
By the way, the
City,
Yankees
Seattle.
have skated back, dude. The Yankees are playing closer to 520 than 575, right? I mean, they're no shoe-in at this point. And, they have moved back to the pack kind of in the same way like a team like the Cardinals has become in the conversation. I mean, the conversation has changed since the All-Star game. It really has. It's baseball, right? I mean, I guess that's why we love it, because the conversation changes, right?
I mean, if you look at the American League standings, I mean, there's only really 3 teams in the American League that aren't in the wild card hunt, and that's Detroit, Oakland, and the White Sox. I mean, everybody else is in that mix. Everybody else is floating close to 500. You can make a case for Toronto needs to kind of get after a little bit because they're still well under 500, but they're not. The way this is going, they're not completely out of it, especially with the amount of division games they're going to play in September. So you've got a lot of teams scrambling.
Dude, the Pittsburgh Pirates think they're independent race.
Hall of Fame legacy right here is the wild card chase.
Yeah, Pirates are 4 games out of first place. Pirates. I haven't talked about them in 3 months, right? I mean, literally, it really is kind of incredible how many teams are involved. And, I guess that's what Manfred and Selig would say. Well, this is where we've saved the game. But Luke had a great point earlier this week. He said it's kind of like when the 8 and 7 teams are playing in, week 17, and, one of them will get the 9 wins and get that last wild card, like that a couple years ago in the NFC South when all the teams stunk. You're really fighting over nothing, but there is something to be said here that in Tampa, Baltimore, Minnesota, Kansas City, we've been out on the West Coast, Seattle late at night, that they still really do have a chance, and it's not a fake chance. It's hey, can you play 600 ball for 2 weeks, maybe?
it just takes a little bit of a hot streak, playing the right teams, and playing well and putting together a 7 or 10 game stretch where you can maybe go 8-2. 5-5 isn't going to cut it at this point in the year. You've got to find a 10 game stretch that you can get 8 out of 10 games and put yourself in position where you're right there going into the divisional games in September to find your way into the playoffs. I mean, it's a 1-game shootout once you get there. I mean, I don't think anyone thinks that the Red Sox at this point. I mean, the Red Sox could still be caught by the Yankees, but it looks less and less likely. So it's which two teams survive at the end, and then you look at the teams in the American League right now, outside of Houston, who's actually been struggling. Cleveland finally got their act together again, and Boston, Boston's been solid for the last 2 months.
It's hard to go out there and win when you got a 15-game lead. I mean, you get lulled to sleep, right?
I think you do a little bit, although, I guess we mentioned the last time we talked, I saw the Dodgers play, and when you're playing .700 baseball at this point in the year, I mean, you're really, really good.
They're 50 games over 500, dude. 50 games over, 5-0.
The way they dominated their division, and the Cubs are being chased down by St. Louis, Washington. They've been hit by the injury bug here in a couple of places, and then they're, but they've got a comfortable lead in their division. They've got to worry about what they're going to be like in October.
They got to worry about Bryce Harper standing upright on first base. Dude, I've seen a lot of stuff. I haven't seen that, right?
I don't think I've seen a guy slip off the bag. If you run right and you run to the bag, generally something like that doesn't happen. But boy, that looked ugly when he slid off the bag and his leg bowed out. The first thing you think of is, he did something really bad to his knee, ACL, MCL, PCL, whatever combination you want to use. That's what it looked like when he landed on the ground. And, they're fortunate that it's just a bone bruise and not much more than that.
I know you worked in the NFL, sort of famous for your work with the Saints and the Falcons down in Atlanta. But you watch a lot of baseball. I'm going to ask you this because this is a weird little thing. I had a baseball lunch with someone who I cannot name, but we were discussing the night before Chris Davis had a ball literally thrown to him, I think from Machado. It might have been Beckham. I don't know who it was. Threw it from that side of the field. The ball came through the glove, literally broke through the netting of the glove. I have not seen that in big league ball. Have you ever seen that?
I've seen it once in college where somebody's one of the strings on the glove broke, and I've seen a ball kind of pass 3/4 of the way through.
This thing sort of smoked it like it was dry rotted or something. Like literally, it didn't just fall apart a little bit. It was kind of like when Randy Johnson hit the bird. Literally, it just kind of like the webbing kind of just flew out. I had never seen that in a big league game, and I wondered if you had, because you always say, well, I always see something you've never seen before.
No.
Yeah.
Not that kind of equipment failure at a big league game like that. I mean, you see some strange things happen out there. A lot of times, I think one player had a ball stick in his glove. He couldn't get it out, so he just threw the glove to first base for the 1-3 foot out. I mean, you see strange things like that happen, but not actually pulling through the glove webbing.
My man, it's always good to catch up with you. We'll get into the Ravens' woes and problems. Anything you want to say on the Flacco thing other than maybe we should take Steve Bisciotti's hint and pray? I mean, when you can't get your quarterback out in August, it's really hard to stay optimistic, man.
Well, listen, I mean, they've got to keep that close to the vest. Obviously, they want him out there for week 1, and that's the only thing they need to worry about. But every day he's not on the field, but of course he knows the offense like the back of his hand. It's not like he couldn't get out there. It's more of just getting your timing right with your receivers, and of course you're asking your offensive line to make sure that nothing else happens to him this season. So there's going to be a lot of Ravens fans holding their breath every time Flacco goes out under center in each game this season, that they can keep him healthy, but they've got other concerns besides quarterback too.
We'll get to those next week. Chris, always great to check in with you. He is Blog and Tackle out on Twitter and the communications director of the Bahamas Bowl and the Pro Football Writers Association. Any news there, Bahamas Bowl, Pro Football Writers, anything you want to plug?
We're a couple weeks out from college football season. Our game is Conference USA and the MAC again on December 22nd down in Nassau. So we're getting ready for the start of college football, and everybody's excited. Everybody's 0-0, and we're gonna see which two teams come to us in December in the Bahamas. But it should be a good one.
Food is good in the Bahamas as I think it is.
What's that?
Is the food as good in the Bahamas as I think it is?
If you like fresh fish, conch, any sort of seafood, it's tremendous.
All right. One day, Chris Pica, when you stop having that bowl game Christmas week between two Ravens games and the holidays, I'm going to come to the Bahamas for the Bahamas Bowl. But can we move that or no? It's always going to be in December, right? Yeah.
Yes, it's always going to be in that week before Christmas every year.
All right. All right, I'm going to go there sometime, though, because it does look nice. You put up a lot of nice pictures, Chris. You and
Jen are always welcome. We have credentials waiting for you if you all want to come down.
I can't do it. I mean, I'd say, yeah, I'd love to come. It's, but I don't think I'm ever going to be able to make that happen. The third.
Unlike the Orioles, we think you're a legitimate media member. We'd be happy to have you, and we'd have a seat waiting for you in the press box.
Yeah, that's very kind of you, Chris. Unlike the Orioles. Cheap shot. I love it. Blog and Tackle out on Twitter. That was the tackle part. The blog part was he tackled the Orioles there. I hope you got that. Blog and Tackle on Twitter. He is Chris Pica, our lifer pal. My first friend in media at the Baltimore News American down there on South Street. My wife and I walked by the building the other day, and I always say to her, this is the News American building, She's like, I know. You've told me 1,000 times. Did I ever tell you that the Shake Shack was in Garrow? No, you've told me that 1,000,000 times. Yeah. So that's when I'm getting to be like, like Al Del Vecchio. Yep. Rosa Coletti. Yep. The Buy-In Toyota Audio Vault is there 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. I haven't thought of Rosa Coletti and Al Molinaro in a long, long time. Got to do some more Happy Days Jump the Shark routines around here. Our morning newspaper comes to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. It's $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Guaranteed. Our morning newspaper, it's awesome. It's thumbs up. Get it. It's especially helpful when you're not on the West Coast. And remember the old Sun? We had the little black boxes in there for the 6th inning and 7th inning. We don't have that. We have full box scores at WNST.net. And unlike my dad, you don't have to chase the paper boy down and yell about him leaving the paper too far from the front step. Comes right to your email inbox, digitally and free, all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook and our YouTube WNSTV channel with more light. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports